How are you doing? Like when people ask you that, like, it's kind of a complicated question to answer. Right? Because people ask me that and I kind of pause. I hesitate and I have these thoughts run through my mind like, do you actually want me to answer this question? Like, honestly? Or do you want me to answer, like, contextually? Like, based on everything going on, how am I? So how are you doing? It's not as easy to answer as we make it sometimes. Because when I ask you that, and if I ask you like before service or just now, like, sometimes you're just like, I'm good. I'm great. I'm living. But honestly, if I was to ask you, right, like give me one word that would best describe how you're doing emotionally, what would you say? Right? No cuss words. No cuss words, but one word to describe how you're doing emotionally. Would it be an I'm good? Great. Or if you were honest, would it be more like, man, I'm angry. I'm upset. I'm afraid of what is going on. I'm anxious. I'm stressed. I'm irritated. I'm unsettled. I'm numb from all the things going on. I'm desensitized. For me, if I was to give you one word, honestly, be like, bro, I'm tired. I'm tired. A lot of things are going on, man. And like sometimes it's just little things, right? Like if you saw him in the news, like Michaela and I just got a dog. And so like, yeah, he's adorable and he's great and all these things, but he's like completely jacked our sleep schedule, right? And that was something that was really meant a lot to me. It was really sacred to me as my sleep. And so sometimes it's little things like that, man, that got me tired. But there's also bigger things, right? Like in my job, right? My calling, right? Which is to lead this youth group in a way that sees growth, both in size, but also in spiritual maturity. And that's great. I love what I get to do. But now, those of you that come on Sundays, I'm also preaching Sunday mornings, right? And I love that. I love to preach. But what that means is now I've got two jobs, essentially. I've got 2 sermons every week to prepare for. I've got 2 slideshows to make every week. Not to mention I'm in school just like y'all working on my master's, which is not easy. Plus, I've still got to be giving my best to Michaela every day, making time for my family. Like, bro, I'm tired. But we all have a word that if we're honest, we could use to describe our emotional state. Because let's be honest, we are all so emotional. We're so emotional. And so what I thought we would do is over the next few weeks, we're going to be looking at messages with the theme of emotions. And so we're not just going to talk about emotions, but we're going to talk about them from a gospel-centered perspective. Right? Because emotions have been given to us by God. They're from God. And so I want us to look at them from the perspective of Jesus. What he endured, what he felt, and let the way he responds to emotions center our emotions. That way we aren't just reacting to our emotions, but we're responding with a gospel-centered approach to our emotions. So now somebody with a lot more time than me did a study of the 4 Gospels, right? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The life of Jesus, right? And they found that Jesus actually displayed 39 different emotions. 39 different emotions. Now, I'll be honest, I didn't know for years that there was 39 different emotions to feel until I started working with youth. And now I experience all 39 in a 30-second conversation with some of you. But Jesus, who was God in the flesh, experienced and felt these very real emotions, the same emotions that you and I feel. Look at some examples. Right? Jesus, he looks over Jerusalem, the people that he loves, that he cares for. But the people that also rejected God, his Father. And what he felt was grief. Right? He grieved for these people that he loved that were missing out on the very thing that God wanted for them. Religious leaders that cared more about rules and laws than people. It made him angry towards their hypocrisy and the sin and the lack of love that they had. There's another story where 72 followers came back and they described how God had been using them and working through them. And he was overjoyed at the faithfulness of God through his people. His friend Lazarus died, and even though he knew he had the power to raise him from the dead, it said he wept in sadness. We talked a few weeks ago about before going to the cross, when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he knew what was about to come, and he felt discouraged. He felt lonely. He felt agony. He felt overwhelmed at the pain that he knew was coming. And so tonight, to start our series, I want us to look at just one of the emotions of Jesus. We're going to be in Luke 7, which is where we see our first emotion from Jesus. To give you a little bit of context, Jesus had just finished preaching one of the most famous sermons ever, right? The Sermon on the Mount. You might have heard that before. Might not know what it is, but maybe you've at least heard that phrase thrown out before. But it's in Luke 7. We're going to start in verse 11. So starting in verse 11, it says, "Soon afterwards, Jesus went with his disciples to the village of Nain, and a large crowd followed him. A funeral procession was coming out as he approached the village gate. The young man who had died was a widow's only son, and a large crowd from the village was with her. When the Lord saw her, his heart overflowed with compassion. 'Don't cry,' he said. Then he walked over to the coffin and touched it, and the bearers stopped. 'Young man,' he said, 'I tell you, get up.' Then the dead boy sat up and began to talk, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. Great fear swept the crowd, and they praised God, saying, 'A mighty prophet has risen among us, and God has visited his people today.'" And if that does not show you the power of Jesus, then I don't know what does. But if it doesn't also show and express the deep and sincere emotion that Jesus felt for people, right? The compassion that he had, right? Visualize this with me if you can, right? Jesus walks up on this funeral procession, right? And it's very different than what you see today, right? If you've ever seen the big long line of cars, everybody's got their hazards on, there's cops out in front with the lights going, the whole thing. That's not what this was. All right, this would have looked a little bit different. They would have had people that were mourners, right? You know what it means to mourn, to grieve. Well, these people did that for a living. That was their profession. And so they would come out with flutes and cymbals, and they would play these instruments, and they would just wail in sadness, just, ah! They're playing instruments, just wailing. But they're representing the grief and the loss that this family was feeling. And so Jesus comes up on the scene, and there are some things that we know and some things that we don't know about what was happening here. For example, we don't know how old this widow was. We don't know. We know she only had one son, so she was probably relatively young, but we don't know. We don't know how her husband died. We just know that she had one and she doesn't anymore because she's a widow. We don't know how recent it was. We don't know the age of her son. He could have been 12, 14, 15. He could have been 3. We don't know. We know very little, but what we do know is that this boy, her only son, almost certainly died about the day before. And we know this because they did not have the kind of tools that we have when somebody dies, right? They didn't have the formaldehyde, they didn't have the embalming fluids, all that. And so because of the climate here, they buried people real quick, like almost the next day after somebody died. And so this loss was fresh for this mom. She was still in the pit of grieving. So if you can visualize this woman who's already lost her husband and now her only son, the amount of emotion that she would have had to be feeling, right? Overwhelming. And in her deepest moment of pain and grief, verse 13 says, the Lord saw her. The Lord saw her. And what's interesting is there's over 40 times in the Gospels that we're told that Jesus saw someone. Right? And that's kind of funny to me because you got to think about who Jesus was. Right? He saw everybody. Everybody wanted to see Jesus. He saw a lot more than 40 people. Wherever he looked, he was seeing people. But over 40 times it said that Jesus saw somebody where he didn't just look, but he saw, right? He noticed. And there's a big difference between looking and seeing. All right, just because you look doesn't mean you see, doesn't mean you notice. Right? Some of you are looking at me now, but you're not really like seeing, you're not really like locked in and in tune. And I can tell you this from personal experience, right? Because I'm a guy. And I see fine. I have contacts, but I see fine. I see a lot, but I don't notice very well. Which is a problem sometimes because Michaela, my wife, notices everything. Right? She notices the wallpaper. Like, she can come in your house one time, and on the way home, she'll be like, "Do you notice their wallpaper?" And I'm like, "They have walls? Like, what are you talking about?" In weddings, when we go to weddings, they're the worst. Because there's 43 million things that you can notice at a wedding. Right? I notice one thing, if there's food or if there's not. And she's like, "Did you notice the dress had this, this, and this, and the flowers were arranged in this way, and there were these kind of flowers, and the cake, and all this." And she notices things that I don't. And so Jesus looks on, and he doesn't just see, but he sees, right? He notices this woman, this single mom, this widow, lost her husband. And now the shock and the grief of her only son being lost as well. And in the middle of all this chaos, right? In the middle of all this emotion, Jesus looks and sees her. What emotions did Jesus feel? Right? When he saw someone in this deep, profound pain, right? Pain that I can't even imagine. What Jesus felt when he saw this woman is the same thing he feels for you when you're hurting. What Jesus felt is the same thing he feels for you when you're hurting, when you're grieving, right? When your home life is struggling and your family is falling apart, when you're trying to do the right thing, but the temptation and the peer pressure is just heavy and it's weighing on you. Whenever you're praying for a friend, just day after day after day, because they don't know God. Jesus feels the same thing for you when you're hurting as he did for this woman in the middle of her pain. It says when the Lord saw her, his heart overflowed with compassion. There wasn't enough room in his heart for the amount of compassion that he felt for this woman. It overflowed with compassion. And the root Greek word that's translated here as compassion is a really cool word, right? It's one of my favorite words, like, in the whole Greek language, right? So the word for compassion here is splagna, all right? S-P-L-A-G-N-A, splagna, right? I love the word splagna. That's awesome. Because it sounds like if you've ever, like, I don't know for what reason, but if you've ever stuck your finger down the throat and you're like, splagna, like, that's like the reaction that you have. Right? That's what it sounds like. And the truth is, that's pretty much what it means also. Right? It means to feel from your gut, from your intestines, like literally. It means to feel, right? There's no stronger word actually in the Greek language to represent the depth of compassion and the feeling for someone else. Right? It's feeling from your gut. I'll give you an example that you've probably felt before. Right? You're riding down the road. You see a car wreck over to the side, like a bad one. Not just like somebody tapped somebody else, like a bad one. Like paramedics, cops, fire truck, whole deal. Right? And you feel it in your stomach. You're like, man, like, I hope they're okay. But it's deeper than that. Like, let's say you see the car wreck, but you also see some people standing around, and maybe you see some paramedics out, and they're working on somebody. And then you really begin to feel even more like in your gut how it hurts, and you're just like, like I feel for those people. I hope they're okay. But it's even deeper than that. Let's say you recognize the car. You recognize the people, and they're people that you know and that you love. That feeling in your gut, that's splagna. It's hurting deep inside where it's ripping your guts out, man. Like, you feel it. The Lord saw her pain, and that's the level of compassion that he felt. He noticed and he felt deep within him, and he cared. So I don't know who needs to hear this today, but God knows what you're going through. And he cares about you more than you can imagine. He feels this same level of compassion for you. He sees your pain. He hears the cries of your heart. He knows when you feel desperate, when you can't even catch your breath because your anxiety is just at such a level where your heart's just pounding and you can't even barely find your next breath. The Lord sees you. He knows that pain. When you're praying for your family, when you don't know how you're going to make it through another day at school, you feel anxious, you feel frustrated, you feel afraid, Jesus sees that. And he doesn't just see in passing, but he sees you. He notices and he cares so deeply. So deeply. And so Jesus sees this grieving single mother, and he hurts and he grieves from deep within his gut. And look at what he says. He says, "Don't cry." Then he walked over to the coffin and touched it, and the bearers stopped. He touched the coffin. And this is important to note, that these coffins aren't like the coffins that we have today, right? They didn't have sides. They didn't even have lids, right? This was pretty much just a flat piece of wood on wheels, pretty much just a cart. And they'd lay the body on there totally exposed. And so Jesus went up and he touched this coffin. Now this was shocking, right? Scandalous even. It was unheard of, right? So much so that the bearers, it says they stopped. But I imagine the people around also just gasped, like shock. Because the Pharisees, right, the most religious people, 613 laws that they kept. And now most of these laws dealt with outward appearances, all about the show of making people think we were something. But one of these 613 laws was that you can't touch a dead body. And not just that, but you can't touch anything that's touched a dead body. So if you touched or you touched something that touched, you would become unclean. Like ceremonially unclean. And so Jesus, this prophet, right, this guy claiming to be the Son of God, comes up and he touches something that would have made him spiritually unclean. You see, like, the boldness that this took. When Jesus touched the coffin, what he did was that he crossed a line. Right? Your parents have probably said that before, like, you've crossed a line. Right? There was a line, you've crossed it. Jesus crossed a line. And I love that about Jesus, right? Because that's what Jesus did. He was a line crosser. Jesus was a rule breaker. Right? Every time religion drew a line, Jesus crossed that line. And why? Not out of rebellion, but because his love crossed that line. Love crosses lines. Whatever line you're feeling in your life right now that may be keeping God at a distance, that's keeping you away from God, because you feel like there's just a line, you need to understand that he crosses lines for those that he loves. Jesus is a line crosser. He's a rule breaker. And so what this distorted, this legalistic religion that was more about rules and laws than it was about love, what it did is that it draws lines. And it drew lines to keep people out. To say, if you're not up to this standard, you're not with us. These lines kept people out. These 613 laws kept people out. And there's lines that we draw today in the church. And that could be a reason that so many people are turned away from church. Are just like, nah, I don't really want anything to do with that. And that could be something that you've dealt with. Something that's maybe made you hesitant to come back to church, to be in church. Because that's what a religion wrongly does, sometimes with good intentions, is that it draws lines. But understand this, if that part of church bothers you or it's hurt you, it bothered Jesus too. Jesus didn't want any lines. He didn't want any external rule to keep you from experiencing him, his love, his grace, his power. And so that's why we don't draw lines. We don't draw lines to keep people out. We cross lines to bring people in. That's what Jesus did. That's what we do. Right? That's what we do. We don't draw lines to keep people out. We cross them to bring them in. That right there is the same exact reason why we open up these doors every single week and we say anyone is welcome. Right? We say that you belong here because it doesn't matter if you have problems, because guess what? I do too, and so does everyone else in this room. It doesn't matter. Come in, you're welcome here because people need the grace of Jesus. And if we draw lines to keep people out, they'll never experience it. You've got to cross lines like Jesus did out of love and bring people in to know him. And so Jesus ignored the religious policies and he touched this coffin. And because it had no sides or no lids, he might have even touched her son. There were no boundaries, no rules, no laws that could keep Jesus from expressing the depth of his compassion that he felt for the people that were hurting. So Jesus touches this boy and the crowd gasps. It's shocking, it's scandalous, how could you do this? But what's more incredible than that is that after the crowd gasped, the boy gasped. Right? He took a breath and he started talking. And now if that doesn't excite you, I don't know what would. Someone in this room should celebrate that, because whatever feels dead in your life right now, this shows that with one touch from Jesus, it can come back to life. Someone, I believe it with all of my heart, needs to hear this tonight, that you just need one touch. That's all it takes, is just one touch from the author of life, the giver of life, and it can bring dead things back to life. Just one touch, just one moment, just one word, just one sense that he not only is with you, but that he cares and that he sees you is enough. So what did it take to completely alter this boy and alter his mom? It took just one touch. Just one touch. And so my hope and my prayer for tonight is that somebody here, maybe for the very first time in your life, there would be one moment, one word, one song, one prayer, one sense of the goodness and the grace of God. That tonight it would cross whatever line, whatever barrier that you feel has been separating you. That you would just know that in this moment that God is crossing that line to show you his love. The Lord saw, he cared, and he touched. Just one touch. It's hard to explain, like almost impossible to describe what this meant for this woman, right? For this widow. Because, right, just moments before this touch happened, she had nothing. No husband, no son. And in today's world, it's not as big of a deal as it was here. It's still sad. We still grieve over it. But we live in a world where women can go and get jobs and support themselves, and you can live that life. This woman could not support herself. If she didn't have a husband or a son in this culture, you were done for. Right? Crazy as it is, women weren't allowed and didn't have the ability to create any way to even feed yourself. This would have left her with two options, with no son, no husband. One, she's a beggar and she's dependent on others for the rest of her life. Or two, and this one's much worse, is that she would have had to sell herself into prostitution just to have enough to eat, just enough to live and get by. But Jesus, with just one touch, not only saves her son, but saves her life. And Jesus carries this boy and gives her back her son. And as he walks over to the mom, he's not only giving back her son, but he's giving back her hope. And so again, it's my prayer that for somebody who feels anxious, who feels afraid, you feel bitter, irritated, agitated, you're always on guard, you're unsettled, you're stressed, you're tired like me, that you would know that with just one touch, God can give back the hope that you've lost. Just one touch. It's just one touch. Jesus sees, he cares, and all it takes is one encounter with him. So I'm going to ask you again, how are you doing? And if you could describe your emotional state in one word, what would it be? Honestly, in this moment, what would it be? Unsettled, anxious, afraid, desperate, hopeless, tense, frustrated, whatever it is, cry out to God with it, because God is moving towards you as you speak. Whatever line that you feel is separating you from his goodness, know that he's stepping across it in this moment, because he's a rule breaker who cares about you, and there is nothing that's going to keep him from pursuing you and reaching out to you, loving you, showing you his grace and his goodness. He's coming for you to show you that he notices you, that he sees you, he cares, and he cares about you more than you can imagine. So when this widow, her only son, experienced the resurrection life from the Son of God, there was nothing that was dead that his compassion couldn't bring back to life. There's nothing in your life that may be dead, may feel dead, that he can't bring back to life, that he can't restore hope in. The relationships that you feel you've lost, your home that you feel like is breaking beyond repair, your mental state, your courage, your whatever it is, there's nothing that you've lost that is dead that his love, his touch can't bring back to life. And so tonight, I want to encourage you to go and to get your hope back. When we break and we pray and we listen to this last song and we have this moment, use it, cry out to God and get your hope back. Know that Jesus sees you, that he notices you, that he cares about you. That your pain, it breaks his heart. He feels it in his gut. His heart goes out to you because more than you can imagine, he cares for you. And all it takes is just one touch. And so when you get this moment, don't just sit here and wait for it to be over so you can go and you can play or you can go home and eat. Don't waste this moment. Because you see the power of one moment with God. Just one touch is all that it takes. And so in this very moment, you could have that one touch that you need in your life. Whatever that area of your life is, bring it to God. Give it to him. Because whatever you think is dead, he has the power to bring back to life. He can give you your hope back, just like he did for this woman. And so during this time, whether it's by yourself, just you and God, and you're just crying out for a touch. Or if you need to get with a group, a small group of friends, one friend, where you can just confess. Confess that one word that maybe you're feeling right now. Confess the depression that you're feeling, the anxiety that you're feeling. And then give that to God. Let him be the one that comes in and touches that and gives you hope back in your life. Whatever it is, use this time, use this moment to meet with God. Or maybe for the very first time, you've never asked God into your heart. You don't know what it means to be a Christian. We talk about these things, and it just doesn't even apply to you because you don't know God. Maybe you're somebody who's seen God. You've been in church, but you've never really known him. You've never really seen who Jesus was. Understand this. Whatever it is that you feel is separating you, whatever that line is that you feel you can't cross to get to God, know that Jesus is a line crosser. That line does not exist here. It doesn't exist to him. No law, no rule, no line, nothing in your past, your present, or your future can keep him from loving you and feeling this amount of compassion for you. So open up and come to him today and just surrender your life to him. Surrender whatever that emotion is that you're feeling, whatever it is that's dead in your life, surrender it to him, because with just one touch, he can bring it back to life. He can give you your hope back. So during this time, you respond however the Lord leads. Go ahead, Brandon.